Admiral Kextar of the Zephyrian Dominion adjusted his 6 eyes as he gazed through the observation deck at the smoldering remains of the human colony world below. The orbital bombardment had been swift and decisive, a standard procedure for dealing with stubborn species that refused to submit to Dominion rule. Plasma cannons had reduced their cities to ash, their military installations to molten craters. The humans' primitive defense grid hadn't even scratched the paint on his flagship's hull. "Status report," he commanded, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction. "Sir, surface scans indicate 97.3% infrastructure destruction. Human military capacity appears eliminated. We detect scattered survivor groups, approximately 200,000 individuals, from an original population of 50 million. The tactical officer's report was crisp. Professional Kextar's thorax swelled with pride. Another successful pacification for his record. The humans had been warned. Submit to Dominion authority or face the consequences. They had chosen defiance, speaking of freedom and self-determination, with the naive passion typical of younger species. Now they would learn as countless others had before them. Excellent. Begin landing operations. Standard occupation protocols. Establish administrative centers in the least damaged areas and begin processing survivors for labor. Assignments. But as the first transport ships descended toward the planet's surface, something peculiar began happening in the debris fields orbiting the world. Twisted chunks of metal from destroyed space stations started moving with purpose, drifting toward each other with subtle course corrections that defied orbital mechanics. Lieutenant Vexhai was the first to notice. "Admiral, we're detecting unusual movement patterns in the debris field. Some fragments appear to be clustering." Kextar dismissed the concern with a wave of his primary arm. "Gravitational effects from our bombardment. Nothing more." On the planet's surface, the landing parties encountered their first surprise. The humans weren't cowering in caves or surrendering en masse as expected. Instead, they were working, frantically, purposefully, with a coordination that seemed impossible for a species that had just lost 97% of its infrastructure. In the ruins of what had been New Geneva, Dr. Sarah Chen crawled through the rubble of her laboratory, her hands bleeding as she searched for specific components. Around her, other survivors weren't mourning their losses. They were salvaging, sorting, building. The bombardment had destroyed their cities, but it had also created the largest salvage yard in human history. "Found it," she called out, pulling a quantum processing core from the wreckage. It was damaged but functional, perfect for her needs. 3 kilometers away, former Marine Captain Jake Morrison was doing something that would have baffled the Zephyrians had they understood its significance. He was teaching children, not how to hide or surrender, but how to identify useful materials in the debris. How to sort quantum components from plasma relays. How to tell if a power cell still had charge. "Remember," he told the 10-year-old girl holding a scanner, "humans don't give up. We adapt, we overcome. And when someone knocks us down, we get back up swinging." The girl nodded solemnly, then pointed her scanner at a piece of twisted metal. "This one's good, right?" "The reading's in the green zone." "That's right, Amy. Good eye." Above the planet, the debris clustering was becoming impossible to ignore. Thousands of fragments were now moving in formation, guided by crude but effective thruster systems jury-rigged from salvaged components. The orbital bombardment had provided the humans with more raw materials than they'd ever had access to before. Admiral Kextar stared at the tactical display in growing unease. "How are they doing this?" "Our intelligence indicated they barely had interplanetary travel capability." "Sir," his science officer reported, "we're detecting massive electromagnetic signatures from the surface. The humans appear to be using the planet's magnetic field as a power source, channeling it through networks of conductive debris." On the surface, the impossible was happening. In just 72 hours, the scattered survivors had created something unprecedented, a planet-wide engineering project, coordinated through quantum-encrypted communications networks built from the wreckage of their former cities. Dr. Chen's breakthrough had been the key, using the Zephyrians' own plasma bombardment residue as a quantum medium. Every piece of debris in orbit was now a potential weapon platform. Every fragment of destroyed infrastructure had become a component in humanity's response. The bombardment hadn't crippled them, it had armed them. "Admiral," the tactical officer's voice cracked with panic, "the debris field is moving toward us." What approached the Zephyrian fleet wasn't random wreckage anymore. It was a swarm of improvised kinetic missiles, each piece guided by quantum processors salvaged from the ruins. Thousands of them, accelerating to tremendous velocities using gravity slings and improvised chemical thrusters. But that wasn't the worst part. "Sir," the communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the planet's surface." The main screen flickered to life, showing a soot-covered human woman standing in what had once been a city center. Behind her, thousands of other humans worked on massive construction projects, turning debris into something new. Dr. Chen smiled at the camera, and Kextar felt his blood freeze at the expression. It wasn't the smile of someone who had been defeated. It was the smile of someone who had just figured out how to win. "Greetings, Admiral. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and I speak for the human survivors of your bombardment. You probably think you've won. You probably think we're broken." Her smile widened. "But here's something about humans you should have learned before you attacked us. We don't just bounce back from disasters. We use them as fuel for innovation." She gestured to the construction behind her. "You gave us the raw materials for the largest engineering project in our species' history. You scattered quantum processors and exotic materials across our entire planet. You provided us with enough plasma-charged debris to build a defense network that spans this entire solar system." The swarm of debris had reached weapons range. Kextar's fleet opened fire, but the targets were too numerous, too unpredictable. Each piece they destroyed broke apart into smaller fragments that continued their approach. Dr. Chen's voice continued calmly as the first impacts began rocking the Dominion ships. "But the real gift you gave us, Admiral, was motivation. You see, before your attack, we were just one human colony among many. Now we're going to be the template for human resistance across the galaxy." The flagship shuddered as improvised missiles began penetrating its shields. In the background of Chen's transmission, massive structures were rising from the ruins. Orbital elevators built from salvaged materials, their tips reaching toward space, so thank you. "Admiral Kextar," Dr. Chen said as alarms began blaring throughout the Zephyrian fleet. "You didn't just bombard us. You turned us into something new, something stronger. And now we're going to show the galaxy what happens when you give humans a reason to get creative." The transmission ended as the first Zephyrian ships began exploding, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of improvised weapons. Admiral Kextar stared at the tactical display in horror, watching his fleet being systematically dismantled by the species he had thought to crush. In the escape pod that would eventually carry him back to Dominion space, he would spend the journey composing a report that would change the galaxy's understanding of humanity forever. The lesson was simple but profound. Bombing humans didn't defeat them, it just made them angry. And creative. And that, as the Zephyrian Dominion would soon learn, was far more dangerous than anything they had ever encountered.